So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 38 of the Footmarks podcast. I'm your host, Behram Qazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me is Jared Kimber, as always, who you can find absolutely everywhere. The topic for this episode of Footmarks is 1 in 10 million. And that is because we're going to be talking about origin stories of Indian cricketers. And as you know, India is the second most populous country in the world. And when it comes to that age demographic of, 15 to 35-year-olds, it's a lot of people. So 1 in 10 million is a rough estimate, but maybe it's more than that, Jared. Maybe it's 1 in 150 million. Who knows?
I think I worked out, so 25 to 20 to 30, let's say. In the year 2010, males was 50 million. So if we then imagine there was 50 million from 20 to 25 and from 30 to 35, that's 150 million plus a couple of teenagers thrown in. So that's 170 million. Okay, so there would be some people who can't play cricket because of disabilities or, whatever it may be that stops them playing that. But it does sort of suggest that 1 in 10 million is a fairly accurate assumption of any one time India has got a team out there. There are 9,999,999 people that could have, or at least might have wanted to be there. It's maybe a slight exaggeration, but I tried to get the number fairly accurate, doing some research, but we don't talk about it enough, right? What did I say? 50 million people between the age of 25 and 30. And that was 13, 14 years ago, the research I found. So I'm assuming it's more now. 50 million men, I should say.
Plus, if you take like 18 to 35, because that's really the age bracket that we're looking at, that number shoots up. And maybe it is like 1 in 12 million, but that doesn't make for a great name of a podcast.
It doesn't sound as good.
1 in 10 million is where it's at.
But if you just take the 50 million from that point, like that literally, that's almost the population of all the people in England. It's almost all the population of all the people in South Africa. It's 2.5 times, 2 times the population of, it's basically Sri Lanka and Australia put together. Maybe even you might be able to fit New Zealand in there as well.
Probably.
Like it's 10 times the population of all of New Zealand. And it's not like 4-year-old girls are going to go on and play for the New Zealand men's team, right? So it is a remarkable amount of people from one talent pool, and it's such an incredible country from that perspective.
Yeah, probably 3 times the amount of sheep in New Zealand. Who has the data on that? Yeah, but anyway, before we
what age are the sheep, and can they represent? No. Sorry.
But before we actually get into the origin stories and how it's so hard to compete for a spot and actually make it to the Indian team, I want to talk about Indian cricket in general overall. Let's bring it into the equation. And it's huge, it's massive in the global arena. It's the main player. There's Indian cricket and then there's everyone else. And even if you stack them up together, you probably don't get to the level of Indian cricket. I think you described it as Amazon being India and the other people just being like fruit sellers or whatever on the street. But basically, they are the main players when it comes to finances and even influence. And you could say that Indian cricketers are worshipped by their supporters in a manner that is, quite alien to cricketers from other parts of the world. Maybe more so South Asian thing, but India is just next level even when you consider South Asia, right? Because it's literally a religion over there. But all of these superstars, they pretty much, like most of them at least, they make it to that level and they have all of this stardom and it's all rainbows and butterflies. But there's a journey that leads to that, right? And they have to compete with, millions of other Indians in that same age bracket. And, given the high population of youth in the country and how popular cricket is as a sport, everyone wants to play it. Everyone wants to become a superstar in cricket. It really is a unique situation that these cricketers find themselves in. And getting to that level where they get to represent India, it requires an unprecedented level of hard work, toil, and a bit of luck as well.
A lot of luck, yeah. I mean, I think it's something we don't talk about really enough with cricket teams altogether. So I did a piece. Actually, I don't even think it was a piece. I think it was just a tweet years ago about what it means for Sri Lanka as a nation to beat India. And people got so, it's just a cricket match. They're two teams. One team's going to win. I was like, that's not what this is for Sri Lanka, right? Like, I was already projecting a little bit forward that maybe Sri Lanka would slip back a little bit, which sadly I was probably quite right there. It was also only the second time that Sri Lanka had ever won a world title. They don't win Olympic medals. They don't have a lot of Hollywood superstars. They don't have a lot of rap stars. Whatever metric you want, they don't have a lot of that sort of stuff. And so it means something to Sri Lanka as a nation. But the other side is that every single person out on that field has a personal narrative. And have you done my writing course? I can't remember.
Yeah, I've done half of it. I still have to complete the other half.
Hopefully it's in the first half, this bit. But there's a bit where I talk about, like, it's really important to remember the players as people. Because it's easy to be, that left back's not very good on his right foot and that's going to hold him back. And you forget that the fact that, he snapped his Achilles tendon in his right foot and people told him he'd never be able to play and his older brother was better than him and all these different things. And, Alistair Cook's a really good example of, when you look at the history of Alistair Cook, right up until the point he makes 100 for England, everyone always said there was someone else more talented than him. His brother was a natural cricketer, a graceful cricketer, and all the kids he played with at junior level. Then the under-19s, it was someone else. You forget that these guys overcome things, and they are. And there was, that obviously we'll get to the main reason I wrote this story, later on. But it's something I don't think we do well enough in cricket. So there's that sort of India and Australia. All the home markets are quite good at going, Nathan Lyon started as a groundsman, but it's kind of a patter, right? And I think sometimes what we forget is that there are all these different people that make up these other teams. And what I was fascinated with in the Indian side of things is the juxtaposition of the most incredible, powerful, wealthy board that we have ever had, and kids that came from a farm in the middle of nowhere, who failed an exam to become a police officer, opening the bowling for India. Like, you have this team and this brand and this board that are huge, and then you just have these young kids who can bowl an outswinger, and he ends up playing for his country. That's the bit that I don't think we focus enough on, that side of things. And it's so much more dramatic. Everything's so much more dramatic in India, but certainly this story is.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, we mentioned how India are the superpower, but as you mentioned, the stories that make Indian cricket, those individual people or players, those stories are wild. You mentioned this story of a kid coming from a farm in Bihar. That is Mukesh Kumar's story. So let's start over there, I suppose. He, as you mentioned, wanted to become a police officer. He failed his fitness test. So interestingly,
I still don't understand that.
Then he became a cricketer.
How hard is it to become a friggin' police officer in Bihar? If an international fast bowler can't become, I mean, was he overweight at the time? Had he just done his back? Like, I need to know more details about this.
Also, Jarrod, in the 90s, we heard these complaints of India not producing enough fast bowlers. Just bring in the police officers.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, Mukesh Kumar fails his fitness test and can't become a police officer, okay? He resorts to playing cricket, but a lot of tape ball cricket, right? He plays years and years in tape ball cricket. That's a big thing over here in the subcontinent.
But also, it was the reason he had to do that is because Bihar is not like a center of cricket, right?
Yeah,
like it's such a remote place that he didn't have a choice. So tape ball cricket is big in many different places, but his particular thing is he's not like some kid in the streets of a major city who's playing tape ball cricket and that's upskilling him. He's playing tape ball cricket as a professional because he's making money off it.
I mean, they pay you per game, these tape ball leagues. They're huge on YouTube. Haris Rauf was big in tape ball cricket in Pakistan. I think Siraj was quite good in India as well. At least he had that same kind of start. But Mukesh is playing tape ball cricket. Then his dad convinces him or drags him literally to Kolkata. And that's where things change for him. And today he finds himself representing India in a test match versus England, right? Sure, we can all argue on how well he played, but he's there. He made it. And
he bowled a good spell in South Africa at one stage, didn't he? In one of those tests, like, you know, and one of the reasons I talk about him is because I know he's going to be abused, right? I know he's going to get abused. And so you're saying, okay, well, now let's look at how he got here. A little bit of respect on this man's name for everything he did to get to this point.
It's like Forrest Gump's story, but a poor man's version, and it's real, right? But yeah, I mean, what fascinated me about Mukesh Kumar, of course, is that once people get to this level, you know, the stardom comes in, and of course, he won't be like as celebrated as India's super duper stars, but he's still an Indian cricketer. He'll have a certain level of respect. He wants to wrap up once he's done with cricket and go back to his farm and live that farmer boy life. And that really gives you a real insight into, you know, the humble starts don't always translate into this lavish life. Mukesh is a simple guy. He's happy with what he's got.
Yeah, and sometimes I remember Moeen Ali used to say that he was going to retire and go and clean the toilets at the mosque. And, you know, as he got older, I think he thought to himself, probably don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I could probably do something else. But do you remember Tyrone Henderson?
No. Is this that guy? Is this Rusty? No. Rusty
no, that's Rusty Theron. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another South African all-rounder, though. Tyrone Henderson was the guy who went, I think it was in the first IPL for massive money, got the money, and then, you know, got to the IPL and they realized he wasn't quite at the level that he thought he was. And it was like $500,000 or something he was paid. And he just went, great. And he went and bought a lovely property in rural South Africa somewhere and put his feet up on the deck and hasn't really done all that much since, right? Like, different people just react in completely, you know, unique ways. You look at someone like Shreyas Iyer, just absolutely desperate to be known and famous and respected. Like, once the cricket didn't work, he didn't go and get a normal job in corporate India or anything. First, he tried to be a politician, then he tried to be a movie star, right? Like, everyone is different in the way they do it. But I love the idea of Mukesh Kumar. And, you know, there are plenty of cricketers who do this, who just disappear back into, you know, their kind of their background life. And, you know, Steve Harmiston's, he's on radio and commentates and does all these things, but he still lives in up north where he grew up. Like, some of these people just want to go back to where they're from. I just thought it was a fascinating thing to say. I didn't think it was a fascinating thing to do. If that makes sense. Like,
it's basically even the Tyrone Henderson thing and Mukesh Kumar. It's the Thanos lifestyle, but they didn't have to kill half of humanity for it, right?
And isn't that better?
Yeah, definitely. Another interesting story is that of well, he made his debut in this Test match, Rajat Patidar. I think his is really fascinating because he wanted to become a fast bowler. Then he tore his ACL in his knee, and he obviously couldn't be a fast bowler after that. Resorted to off spin, failed. Then he finally picked up a bat and he made it to the IPL, played in the 2021 season, failed, you know, 4 games, I think, for 70 runs he scored.
Yeah, it wasn't much,
like
was
that.
it?
Yeah. And then here's a guy who's almost 30. He's reinvented his game multiple times and he hasn't been picked for the 2022 season of the IPL. And he's considering getting married, and there are probably thoughts of whether or not he wants to continue being a cricketer. But then he is convinced to play that season and change the dates of his wedding. He comes in and scores 333 runs at a strike rate, an average of 50 and an astronomical strike rate. Everyone knows
strike rate as well, I think. Yeah.
Everyone knows about Rajat Patidar across the globe because he's performed in the IPL now. And he missed next year's IPL due to a foot injury, but now he's gone on to make his Test debut in Vizag. And I don't know if there's any other story that screams Bollywood as much as this one, because there's a wedding involved in it, you know?
So, you're right. Although I do think there's a story later on that will be made into a movie, if we're being honest. But you're right. This is a fantastic story, isn't it? I think I was trying to work out what year he did his knee, and I think he was quite old. Like, but by that I mean, you know, that it's different if you injure yourself at 15 or 16, and you know, like Stuart Broad wasn't a fast bowler when he was 16, and you know, Mitchell Starc was a wicket keeper, and Jofra was a wicket keeper. Like, that's a bit different. But I think Patidar was kind of in the system as a bowler when he got injured, and then was like, okay, well, I'll go to off spin, and that doesn't work. It's a remarkable career of failure. And I also found it really interesting that, and I've got a feeling an Australian cricketer did this, and it might be Adam Voges, who got picked or was going to go on a tour but had planned his wedding and knocked it back. And there's something in, again, it's a little story that just kind of, you put it in the back of your head, but it tells you something about, Rajat Patidar and the kind of person that he is, that was his big chance. But he was thinking, yeah, but I might go and sit on the bench. And do I really want to put my wife and my family out to go and sit on the bench and not do anything? And he was convinced to do it. And as you said, it is a a Bollywood story. And I, watched him in this test match. He just knows what he's doing. He just looks like, he actually reminds me of Joe Root. He reminds me of Jonathan Trott. Obviously a different kind of bat. I mean, Jonathan Trott wouldn't get a 150 strike rate in a dream, but, plays the ball under his eyes, understands his game 100%. By the time, he wasn't always as, it took him a long time to develop. If you have a look at it, and I'd love to talk to him about this, but you can see around COVID, he takes a big step up, so I think he really worked on his batting and, got to a different level. Just a professional who knows his game and tries really hard and everything else. But I think this because we've probably discussed it before, and we'll probably do a foot marks on it one day. I think my favorite cricketers are the ones who make it to professional level in one skill.
What was that bowler?
In another.
The spin bowler for Australia who just played one game? You were obsessed with his career. He was a club level bowler. Finally got that. Yeah, Bryce McGain. There you go.
No. So I'm more talking about who would it be? Michael Vardy would be one.
Do you mean Michael Yardy?
Yes. What did I say?
Vardy.
Is Vardy a footballer or an NFL player? I know he plays another sport.
Jamie Vardy, Leicester boy.
Oh yeah,
well, lad.
I don't know where I went there. Mike Yardy is one. Azhar Ali is another one. Kyle Jamieson, I suppose you would put up there. Mark Richardson. There's a lot of these guys who I just find that absolutely fascinating that they can completely develop. They can make the professional. Stuart Broad's probably another one as well.
Yeah,
they make the professional level on one and then completely change. I've always just found that those are the people that you really respect, that want to see. Benny Howell is another one. They just want to find a way to make it work because they want to be. It's the game they love. There's a chance for them to really change things, and there's no doubt that Patidar probably fits that kind of pattern again. And I love stories like that.
There's definitely a foot marks in that, so write something on it. And I mean, if it was a Bollywood movie, right, the first major hurdle would be, he's done his knee, the ACL is gone. Now he's bowling off spin and he's trash at it. Then he's batting and batting and batting. He falls in love somewhere in between, fails at the IPL. Now he's at this juncture where he's like, screw it, fuck it, I'm just gonna get married. But then his wife or soon-to-be wife comes and says that, you gotta go chase that dream. And that is what makes the movie, right?
So, I just want to see this movie because I want to see a musical number about a torn ACL because I think that would be the coolest thing ever.
The dance sequences would be great.
Just definitely. Limping on one leg while the surgeon's trying to operate and put his cartilage, not his cartilage, his cruciate ligament back together.
No, God comes and fixes it. The surgeons fail.
That's obvious. I can't believe I missed that.
But anyway, speaking of some other interesting stories, there's one fun origin story on Axar Patel. And I've always wondered why Axar has an X in his name. Now we have the answer, why it's spelled that way. So care to enlighten our listeners, Jarrod?
So this is the third different story I found about Axar Patel's name. So I was originally told that his father was trying to pronounce the name and the clerk at the I don't know, where you register births got it wrong. And then there was another story that someone else had told me. But weirdly enough, I found it today that Axar Patel actually came out and said what it was. It was originally spelled Akshar, which I think might be his Twitter handle.
That would make sense because that's how we do it over here.
Yeah, that's the normal spelling of Axar, right? Yeah. That's why that's why we don't call him Axar. We call him Axar because that's what his name is supposed to be. And then when he went to school, there was an issue where the principal wrote it down as AXAR, which I do find interesting because I'm with you. That seems like an odd mistake to make, but obviously that happened. But here's where it gets weirder. He didn't have a passport when he got picked for India under 19s. And he was at school, and I think there was a short turnaround, and he told his father to come in to put all the documents together so he could go and play and get a passport. And somehow when all this happened, one of the documents from the school had this AXAR, right? And so that ends up being the one in his passport, despite the fact that's not his name. And then I didn't put this in the piece, but it goes further. So at one IPL team, he plays as AKSHAR. And at another IPL team, he plays as AXAR. And he said now that he kind of like goes between the two. It's just, I mean, again, you've got a story of someone who knows what Axar Patel's life is like if he doesn't make it in cricket, but, doesn't have a passport when he's clearly, 17, 18, 19, probably, around that age. And then the whole thing has to be rushed. And then this all happens. Again, it just shows you just how sort of mad some of this stuff is. And I won't get into the full list of all that weird visa and passport stories. I mean, we talked about some of them recently.
Major Bennett is one story.
You want to know about Major Bennett, don't you?
We'll save it. We'll save
this
it.
Is not the Major Bennett needs his own space because there's backstory to Major Bennett. There's stats to Major Bennett. There's other stuff. Don't worry, we'll get to Major Bennett. But you're right. The Major Bennett story is one of the great stories about stupid names in cricket. So I just, again, another bizarre sort of, happening that only happens because this guy was incredible at cricket. And, at the same stage, his life and his name changed. I'm not sure that happens all that much unless you're a woman who gets married and has to change her surname.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that principle probably has some sort of hand in this. People who believe in, numerology and astrology or whatever, they probably believe that maybe if he was AKSHAR, maybe he wouldn't have that same sort of success. Who knows? But, Akshay is a very common name in India, and that's always with a KSH. And Lakshman, VVS Lakshman spelled it with an X. So maybe there is something to do over here with the X.
Someone did tell me, I think it might have been Abhishek Janjanwala, the former India A player. I think it was him who was telling me that X's are really uncommon in India in names. And because I don't think he knew the full story of that of Axar either. So it's a random one. And it's also, the other problem with it is that you have to know the backstory to pronounce it correctly, right? Yeah. Because otherwise it does look like Axar. And then you have another Josh Butler or Pat Cummings or Ravi Ashwin type situation as well. Yeah. So his name is almost always said incorrectly. And it's not, like I've told all the English commentators what his name is and they know, but once you read it as Axar, not Axar.
Yeah, it is one of those. And some people might read it as Azar, because X at certain times can be a Z. Yeah.
I've never heard anyone say that, but I can see that.
Yeah, no, I've never heard anyone either. And I mean, people who are from South Asia would kind of put two and two together and say, okay, he's going with Akshar over here. What did Lakshmipati Balaji go with? Was it an LAKSH or LAX? I don't remember. Or Lakshman Shivaramakrishnan. What did those guys use?
I think some of those guys have X's. Yeah.
They might, right?
Yeah. Just on names, by the way, Jeff Thompson called Glenn McGrath the whole time.
A lot of people call him Glenn McGrath. Weirdly,
no, that's a lot of people did around the world. If it's not from your, but Jeff Thompson knew the name and still said it, which it's just something I've always remembered of. Like, you're just being a dick to be a dick, and he probably did it as a joke when he started his career. And then McGrath took 500 wickets, and it just made Tomo look like more of an idiot. The longer McGrath stuck around. Anyway, sorry, the longer McGrath stuck around.
Basically, we've spent a lot of times on names. I think we need to carry on with more origin stories. And there is, of course, Shreyas Iyer, who we need to discuss. He turned up at Praveen Amre's camp, and he was sent back because there were no vacancies, which has been a recurring theme in Shreyas's career, such that he's been late to the party. The teams that are supposed to recognize his talent and utility, they have been late to the party in terms of recognizing it. So that's a fun one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he's such a naturally gifted player. I would have thought that, and they knew who he was. Like, he wasn't unknown, I don't think, to the camp at the time. Yet they didn't just slip him in because of who he was. And you think about later on, that World Cup in 2019, Shreyas Iyer probably would have been a pretty handy player to have, early on. And I've said this before, I think part of the reason he's a little bit behind his development curve is because he probably came to Test cricket a couple of years later than I would have liked.
in India's middle order in that 2019 World Cup?
Oh, I can't remember now, but it was the one where they didn't make any runs at number 4.
Yeah,
Was it the one where everyone batted at number 4? Or was
I think
I can't
it's
remember.
the one where everyone batted at number 4.
Yeah,
That's
I think that's it. I know I wrote a piece about it, but I can't remember now. But so it would have made a bit more sense. And I did a piece about Shreyas Iyer a while back about there is an element of a player of that talent. If you keep them in first class cricket too long, that eventually they just don't work in Test cricket because it's like they end up clocking first class cricket and all the changes in Test cricket they're not prepared for. Whereas if you throw them in at 21 or 22, they might fail, but it gives them a chance to at least understand, oh, this is slightly different, so I'm going to have to play like this. And Graham Hick is obviously the most famous example of someone we believe this happened to, right? Of like, unfortunately for Graham Hick, he was qualifying for England and was absolutely dominating Zimbabwe first-class cricket and Australian first-class cricket and England first-class cricket. And then he gets to Test cricket and just can't get it going.
Mark Ramprakash is another one.
I don't know if he had to wait as long, though, Ramps. So he might have just been someone who, it doesn't make any sense that Ramps failed. But yeah, it's, we have seen, it doesn't happen that often because most players of Shreyas Iyer or Graham Hick's talent play Test cricket fairly early, at least get a chance to fail and get an idea of it. But yeah, so I don't know if it plays a big part or not, but it is an interesting one that it kind of feels like he has to doubly prove himself at all times to get through.
Even as a kid, if you're not getting, that vacancy or a spot in the Praveen Amre camp, then it goes on to show you that even when you have all of that talent, and you seem to be destined for some sort of success, it can take time. And that's happened to him both at that junior level and at senior level. So it's an interesting one. Speaking of people who, the opposite actually of people who, somehow find themselves in the Test team when they never would have thought they would have made it, would be KS Bharat. He has quite an interesting story. He just made, didn't make his debut, but he just played a Test match in front of his home crowd in Visakhapatnam, the Vizag Test. And, that is an obscure cricketing center. It's not like a lot of players come from there. Vizzy came from there, and Vizzy is not someone that, should have played for India.
At least we know that Bharat is not the worst cricketer to come from there. He doesn't have to worry about that one, does he?
Yeah, definitely. And, interestingly, he was once a young ball boy on the boundary when MS Dhoni scored 100. And he didn't take up the gloves till he was 19. So
that shocked me.
Did
that shock you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a wicketkeeper, I would assume that you've been doing it all your life. And 19 is the sort of age where it's probably hard to pick up a skill of that kind of, level.
Yeah, if he was like a Ben Duckett or an Ollie Pope wicketkeeper, I'd be like, or, like more of a casual wicketkeeper, I'd be like, yeah, I could see why someone at the age of 20 or 21 is like, I could probably do this. But he's like a specialist wicketkeeper. Like he's got, proper wicket-keeping skills. And that's the sort of guy that usually, as you said, he turns up to his club team. He doesn't bowl very well. They chuck him the gloves, and that's all he does from then on in. I was absolutely shocked at that. He just doesn't appear like that kind of player. And, it's India, and maybe not quite on that sort of England or Sri Lanka level where everyone's a wicketkeeper. But, you look at India and, Parthiv Patel, Dinesh Karthik, Rishabh Pant, MS Dhoni. I'm missing like Sanju Samson.
Ridhwan
Saha, and I reckon there's another one that we've just forgotten as well. Like they had quite a lot of good wicket keepers, and KS Bharat is a guy who at 19 wasn't wicket keeping and is ended up in the Test team from a what would you say, like a second tier state when it comes to cricket.
And I mean, think of this.
I didn't mean to thumbs that up, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, imagine how specialist wicketkeepers are a dying breed in the first place. You need to be a wicketkeeper batter. And not just in this era, you can go back to the start of the millennium. That's something probably Adam Gilchrist changed, right? And yet he's made it. And you spoke about all of those great wicketkeepers, but let's be real. There is no chance that KS Bharat ever gets a game for India unless Rishabh Pant is in a car accident. And as unfortunate as that is, one man's poison is another man's meat, and it's KS
Is that
Bharat.
a phrase?
I switched it. I flipped it because
I was like, I've never heard that phrase before. That seems like a punchy phrase. I like it. Don't get me wrong.
I flipped it on purpose because I was like, it has to be Bharat's meat. So it should come
I
after.
heard someone say the phrase, that he wreaked havoc on someone today. And I was like, that's so much better than wreaked havoc. I would love to wreak havoc.
But anyway, he is now playing for India in their test team. I'm not sure if he'll get another game or not because,
He might get dropped, yeah.
he hasn't scored much runs, but he's gotten 6 tests. He's played one of those test matches at home. And, on one hand, you have the Shreyas Iyers of the world who have, the talent, who deserve to be there playing top level cricket, but, that journey has been delayed for them. And on the other hand, you have someone as random as KS Bharat who didn't even want to become a keeper till he was 19. And he was so below in that depth chart of wicket keepers, even in the current day, and he still managed 6 test matches.
No, it's a remarkable story. I think that's fair. And, have you ever heard the story about Nasser Hussain and which player he tried to imitate the most?
No, but I have seen a clip of young Nasser Hussain hit boundaries in the Under-19 World Cup, I think.
Oh, wow. So Nasser Hussain copied Steve Waugh. And the reason he copied Steve Waugh is Ricky Ponting was around and Brian Lara was around and Sachin Tendulkar was around. And he was like, well, I can't be them. Right? But I can maybe be like, a worse version of Steve Waugh. Right? And if you're a young Indian player, you probably can't be Kohli or Bumrah, right? I mean, there aren't that many of them out there. The chances of you getting that. KS Barrett, it's like, maybe I could do that. I just work on my skills. I do everything I need to be. I'm professional. I turn up on time. I make the most out of what I have. And then maybe something falls into place. Like,
maybe I'll play a World Test Championship final someday.
Do you know what I mean? So I think it's a really, really interesting one.
And moving forward, of course, Kuldeep Yadav is another fascinating story. Now, he dreamed or dreamt of being Wasim Akram as a kid. So he wanted to bowl left arm pace and swing it and reverse swing it. But athleticism, or the lack of it, kind of denied him that dream.
He's not a natural fast bowler's body, is he?
No, not at all. I mean, I have more of a fast bowler's body than Kuldeep Yadav, perhaps. But, his left arm did have some talent because left arm wrist spin is a unique skill on its own, and it's even harder to master, let alone just, bowl. And he made waves in international cricket as soon as he came onto the scene. And then he fell off the radar or a cliff, really. And everyone thought that Kuldeep was done and dusted. He's not coming back from here. And yet he made a comeback, returned as a better bowler than before. And he's just been, surreal ever since he's been back. One of the best spinners currently in cricket. That is an amazing comeback story.
I had a piece ready to go on the fact that I thought he was done and we'd never see him again. And it wasn't because I didn't think he was a good bowler. It's that's the thing that happens to left-arm wrist spinners a lot. They come in, they take a couple of wickets, people get a little bit more used to them particularly, and then they disappear. Especially the left-arm wrist spinners who have massive wrong-uns generally. Once people start to pick them, then the word gets out and they just become easier to play. He's done a couple of things that I never thought. He's had to come back. But he's also got quicker. Do you know how hard it is as a spinner to put on pace? It's not a case of bowling quicker because of the revolutions you're putting on the ball and everything else. Like, you can bowl quicker balls, but they probably won't have any revolutions on them. Actually finding a way to increase your pace while still putting the revolutions on the ball is just absolutely incredible. And he's also, he was loose when and lots of young left arm wrist spinners are. They're loose. They're not particularly accurate. Then they don't really know what they're doing. They're just putting the ball roughly in the right area and hoping things happen. He's not like that anymore. He's, a much more much more clear bowler and knows what he's doing. And, how many young players, Abhinav Mukund and what's his name, Camberley, and a young fast bowler will come out of nowhere, and if you don't make it quickly in India, that can be it. I think it's almost more surprising to me when you have a comeback like this than you getting a game in the first place, because the depth chart of the talent of their spin. Again, to go back to the wicket-keeping thing, is just phenomenal, right? Like, there's probably 3 guys in their India A side at the moment who can all take wickets in test level, and also a couple of which can bat, right? Like, there's a lot of talent out there. And so it's really hard to come back. So all credit to him. And The only other thing I would say, just on a cricket point of view, it's a tiny nerdy thing. The fact that he was a fast bowler when he was younger is probably an advantage to him as a wrist spinner, because it means he probably has a slightly faster arm. And you need a faster arm with wrist spin than you do with finger spin, because the revolution slowed the ball down even more. And so I do think that has actually helped him. But, he's the Wasam Akram of spin. A lot of people complain that I'm not a former cricketer, and so that I don't really know the game. Well, you know what they can't claim? That I don't know desks. I've been using desks for years. I'm a collector of desks, old and new, and I'm sitting on a new one right now. I'm the Don Bradman of sitting at desks. So when I tell you that the E7 Pro next generation height adjustable desk from Flexispot is legit, this is like Michael Jordan talking to you about sneakers. This desk holds 160 kilograms. It is as stable as anything I've ever seen, and it has under-desk cable management. But really, the main skill here is that this desk rises and falls at the push of a button, and it moves super quick. And it has so many settings that remember your favorite heights. It really does it all. And I could not recommend the E7 Pro from Flexispot anymore, even though I am currently sitting on one of Flexispot's BS12 Pro multifunctional, adjustable, upgraded fabric, ergonomic chairs. My butt and computer have never been happier than when using one of Flexispot's products. So get over to their page right now for big savings.
Yeah, I mean, if he was trying to imitate Waz, then he'd have to have a fast arm, right? And it's interesting, there's actually an anecdote with respect to this, is that when he was playing for Kolkata and Wasim Akram was part of the coaching staff, and this is young Kuldeep, he told Wasim that I wanted to be like you and bowl like you when I grew up. And Wasim was like, good thing you switched, because you wouldn't have met me otherwise. So there's a bit of that. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to left arm wrist spinners, at least in contemporary cricket, he's right up there. Like, you've got your Noor Ahmeds and Tabraiz Shamsis, but Kuldeep is just a different gravy. And to your point, when you kind of fall off a cliff and are not on the radar anymore for Indian cricket, you have to prove yourself twice as hard to make that comeback. And boy, has he done that or succeeded at that. Anyway, let's come to our feature segment of the podcast. We've built it up with all of these other origin stories, and now we're going to come to the big one, because this is what inspired Jarrod to write the piece in the first place, and it is a story worth mentioning. The Patidar Bollywood story was more like flowery, and it had its ebbs and flows and deep points, but there were a lot of songs in that one, a lot of dance sequences. This one is like storytelling, real tough to watch sort of imagery. That's how I see this Bollywood movie shape up.
It may not even be a Bollywood movie. It might actually have to be just a genuine drama without any songs, this movie.
It has to be a Scorsese movie or something like that. We're talking about Yashasvi Jaiswal, of course, who just hit his career best score in his 6th test match. So he scored 170 odd on debut, then scored 209 versus England at Visakhapatnam. Basically won India that game and allowed them to level the ongoing test series with England, which is, of course, 5 matches and we're only down to 2. But let's rewind the clock, Jarrod. And we're back in rural Uttar Pradesh. Yashasvi is a 10-year-old boy and he, dreams of being a cricketer. And he has embarked on a miraculous and quite dangerous journey with respect to chasing his cricket dream, because he traveled thousands of miles from his village, which was quite remote in Uttar Pradesh, to one of the world's biggest cities in Mumbai, also one of the most populous cities in the world. And initially, he lives with his uncle in a suburb. And, let's just pause there for a bit. There is more to the story, but I want to take a pause over here, because for a 10-year-old to just do that, to leave your own house and go live with your uncle thousands of miles away, it requires a certain amount of courage. And just for that kid to take that risk, I think it's enormous on its own. And this story gets wilder later on.
Yeah, I mean, it requires courage, but also clarity of mind. So I've got a 9-year-old boy who is talented at many different things, right? And if he made a decision in a week's time to go to Mumbai and try and make it as a cricketer, the next week he would make a decision to go to New York and try and make it as a basketballer. And the next week he would decide to go to somewhere else and try and make it as an actor, right? Like, the singularity of the thinking is just mind-blowing. Yeah. And, you and I both know adults who at 20, 25, 30, 35, maybe even 40, 45, don't actually know what they want to do with their life. And you've got a 10-year-old who does that. The parents part of this is more interesting. I'd love to sit down with his parents and work out, because, and I think we do know this, and you know, this is going to sound weird, but you know, parents of trans kids, sometimes you just know, right? Like that it's wrong and that this person has to do this. And yes, they're young, but you just understand it. And perhaps there was an element of that, of like, there wasn't any other option. He was going to have to go and maybe fail, and do that. But as you said, that isn't the whole story. It's not like he goes there, lives with his uncle at 10, and then a couple of years later plays for under 19s, is it?
No. So he basically goes to his uncle, and then he realizes that the commute to go to the city from his uncle's place or that suburb is just not feasible. You know, it takes up a lot of time, and that prompts Yashasvi to actually go to Mumbai and take refuge in a dairy shop. That's where he lives. He exchanges labor to have a place to sleep, and he's working on his cricket, and that doesn't work either. So now he goes to the famous Azad Maidans of Mumbai. Of course, Sachin was also a product of those Azad Maidans. And over here, he's actually offered residence by the Muslim United Club ground, and he lives in the staff tent over there. So now he finally has a home, and he has a place where his game can be nurtured. He can have that singularity of thought and focus on his cricket. And that journey from start to finish, let's not even get to him making it. That alone could be a movie, you know?
But you've also forgotten that his parents, by this stage, by the time when it doesn't work in that first, you know, the dairy shop and with his uncle, his parents are like, come back home. Yeah. What are you doing? Right. And it's incredible that, you know, maybe they didn't have they're so far from Mumbai. It might have actually been hard for them even to go and get him. Yeah. At that point. Right.
Like it would have cost money, you know?
Yeah. Like it was. And who knows what their situation was or anything. But I could only imagine. I think if you have a child who is that dead set on something, if you thought they were that sort of child, I could understand in certain situations how this would happen. I'm not sure I have those children. But I can understand there might be situations where that is possible, right?
Have you heard him speak? Have you heard Yashasvi Jaiswal?
Yeah.
You can listen to that clarity. You can listen to that 10-year-old speak.
Exactly. But even with that, I think once it didn't work straight away, even if you believed in the clarity and everything else, I think you would just go and try and just say, look, let's try again when you're 12. Right? Let's try again when you're 14. It doesn't have to be now, right? Absolutely remarkable. But even when you say, you know, he's living in the tent at the Maidan, it's not as if that is a safe and secure environment for a child, right? He's still struggling for, you know, food and nurturing. All these basic things he's still struggling with at that time. So it's, you know, I do think from that perspective, it is certainly worth remembering that this is not something that is, what's the best way of putting it? It's not as if he suddenly, you know, walks into a sitcom and everyone, you know, looks after him. They're looking after their lives and they're busy, and they've now got a 10-year-old hanging around. Like, it's still not it's pretty far from a perfect situation. And this is the better situation than the last two.
Yeah. And I mean, just the thought that, you know, you see your parents after so long and they're saying, come home, kid, come to a more comfortable environment. But he was a dreamer, and I firmly believe that Yashasvi manifested this reality for him. I am a big believer in manifestation, and I think he probably just daydreamed the crap out of it and just applied that dream on the field. He played with that determination, and for him, maybe failure was never an option, and he just knew that he's going to play for India one day. I feel that sort of energy from Yashasvi, because when he came on to talk to the media personnel after day one, he was on 179, I believe. Of course, he only added 30 runs after, you know, he came out to bat next day. But Yashasvi was saying, yeah, I'm going to try and double up on this effort. I'm going to double the score, and I'm going to win India this game. So this is someone who seemed to be laser focused. And like you mentioned, go for it.
No, you go.
You mentioned how, you know, there's so many people who don't even know what to do with their lives at 30. Look, I was 17 when I went to university and I did not know what I want to do with my life. I graduated university. I did not know what sort of job I'll be good at. And after I had built enough capital, I was like, okay, I've always loved cricket. I've had a taste of this. I really want to work in cricket. So it took me 28 or 27 years of my life to really find that focus that, okay, this is what I'm going to try to do and I'm going to go all guns blazing. I know you have a similar story, Jarrod, where, you picked up cricket quite late.
I came to cricket quite late, but I think from the age of 5, I knew I was going to be a writer. And so I get his story from that perspective. Like I do understand that side of it. But I also think if you have clearly he was a child that was gifted, right? In focus and in talent for cricket, and who knows in what other things. I do think there is an element then of, as a parent, of, okay, he's going to go to Mumbai, he's going to have his uncle, he's going to have a mobile phone, or, however they hooked him up. Like, he wasn't, I'm assuming he was still contacting his parents quite regularly. It was 2012. It wasn't before mobile phones were readily available or anything like that. I mean, I'm hoping, or at least he had a way of contacting them and keeping in touch. And it was obviously family members in Mumbai that he could go to. I don't know if I would let my children do it. But I also understand that because I had a similar kind of drive at a similar kind of age. And I probably would have been better off with this kind of random thing than trying to go to school, which wasn't suiting me very well. But I can understand it from the parents' point of view as well, of it doesn't really matter if he makes it at cricket because clearly he had some kind of inner drive that he was gonna make it at something. But regardless of that, it's a 10-year-old in Mumbai on his own. And Darren Goff was joking today on our podcast when we were talking about it, and he was saying he gets intimidated by Mumbai now. Right? Like it's a big scary place, especially for a friggin' kid from where's he from? Up north somewhere?
Uttar Pradesh. I don't know where exactly that is. Do
you know what I mean? It's like that's a culture shock. Like Mumbai isn't even really like other parts of India, let alone like Uttar Pradesh. So I just it's a remarkable story, and I suppose what I would say is that I wonder how often this happens because it doesn't feel like a very common story, but I can't imagine the vast majority of them end up particularly good. Happy endings, right? And I know that traditionally it was probably something that happened a little bit more in the older days. I don't know if people know that, but there was a lot of kind of kids just going off on their own before school sort of became 5 to 18. So things like that happened, but it just feels like a magical story. And he went on to play cricket, but actually he could have been fighting a dragon in a cave somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, who's to say what sort of challenges he might have faced? And, you mentioned how you would have known at 5 that you're going to be a writer. I, in high school, had like a vision board and I had like John Dykes on there from Sports Center. So I had a dream, but I did not have the hustle. And here's a kid who had a dream and the hustle at 10 and he made it work. And he also, let's not undersell the fact that he worked his ass off to, rise above the ranks.
Yeah.
I mean, Mumbai cricket is extremely competitive, and the fact that he made his domestic debut at 17, then had a phenomenal Under-19 World Cup, smashed that 100 versus Pakistan out of all countries in the semi. Forget quality. That's a different kind of pressure for a kid, right? India-Pakistan kind of brings that pressure to the table. And that propelled him even further. He made it to the IPL. He had a stellar IPL. He's never looked back since. In first-class cricket, he has, as you mentioned, the best conversion or better conversion rate than the Dawn, albeit a very small sample size, but that's a better conversion rate than the best to have arguably ever played the game. It is, even more incredible that we have recounted this entire story of, perseverance, chasing a dream, hustle, braving it out in adverse environments and adapting. And yet this is a kid who's 22. He has his entire career ahead of him. And we're talking about this movie and we don't even know how the latter half of the movie will happen. What's the end over here? This story has just begun, and it's just one of the most incredible stories to come out of cricket. Shamar Joseph, we celebrated that story as well. Yeah. That's still 1 in 350. This is 1 in 10 million.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think the chances of, I would love to know how often let's say in India, but I suppose in any country where this is possible to happen, a 10-year-old leaves home, travels to another city, doesn't actually end up staying with their family, and the story ends up positive.
Yeah.
Not great, just positive.
Yeah.
Right.
Just something like he plays domestic cricket or something, or he doesn't die.
That's what I mean. Like, he goes on to have a successful career as a telephone salesman, or he becomes a train driver or something like that. Like, it just feels so remarkable that he would do that. And I remember, when you have kids, you have all these wild conversations, and I remember my wife saying, because my kids were always going to play tennis. And obviously, I was a tennis coach, and my mum runs a tennis club, and it was one of the sports that we really wanted them to know. It's a great social sport, tennis, right? Like if you're on holidays and somewhere, like there's usually a court, and you can pick it up and play, and and meet members of the opposite sex. There's a lot of good things about tennis if you can pick it up. And I remember my wife saying, "Well, what happens if one of our children is just absolutely brilliant at tennis? Could we send them to Florida?" And because that's where all tennis players obviously used to end up at that point. And it's a really interesting conversation when you start to think of it that way, because your first thought as a parent is, no, like, I'm not going to let my child go off on their own. Like, the idea of boarding schools to me is the stupidest idea ever. Like, you parents and family helps and community helps build your child, not a bully. In a center. But that's a little bit different when you have a really gifted child, right? Or a really laser focused child, or whatever that may be. And they've got to find their own path. And it sounds ridiculous to allow a child to find their own path at 10. But, the fact it's worked, I think is that it's almost the worst story ever, because I'm horrified that all these 10-year-olds around the world are going to start going out on their own and trying to do stuff. But he just knew what he wanted to do. And I love that. And the fact that he did it is it's beyond, as you said, his life's barely started, and he's already got a life story that most people will never be able to even get anywhere near.
I mean, we're halfway through the movie and it's already a blockbuster, isn't it? And I mean, we spoke about all of these other origin stories, and there was an element of luck over there. When you look at Yashasvi's story, there is no element of luck. He made his luck over here. He literally fought through all of those adversities and rose through the ranks and, made it in Mumbai, out of all those cities where it's so hard to make it as a batter. It's just beyond incredible. And, I think another solid bit of perspective that has come out, and you mentioned this earlier, is the success rate of these sort of stories is probably really, really low. We've spoken about these great success stories, but imagine about how many countless failures and heartbreaks there might be in all of this. And you probably have a better shot at winning the lottery in some countries than making it as an international cricketer in India.
No, exactly. And then doing it as a 10-year-old who's left home and is essentially homeless. Like, I know he wasn't.
Even Rusty and Bluey had a nurturing environment, okay?
Exactly. Rusty's dad wasn't even around. He was out in the army, but still fighting cats, I assume, in the army because he was a dog. I don't really know how that works. But people who don't understand what we're talking, that's going to be such a random reference for most people. But yeah, look, I think there's still an element of luck. But in a different way. I think in his case, the luck is the external stuff, as in, what if there was an issue with his uncle? What if he didn't find the tent? What if the coach didn't find him early on, and bring him? We didn't even talk about that, that coach finding him, bringing him into his home, looking after him, all that sort of stuff. What if he had to get a job? Right. Yeah. Because I think one of the big things was we always heard that he was working on the streets as a young kid to pay his way. And now we find out that wasn't quite the case. Right. That actually what happened was this coach went, no, you focus on cricket. We can provide for you over here and we'll give you a bed and everything else. So I suppose it's luck, but it's luck in a different way than the others. But the truth is that, and people absolutely hate this, but it's true. Luck plays a big part in how these things go. And there are incredibly talented athletes that we don't know about because it just didn't get the breaks that they should have, right? And
Hmm.
their life went in a different direction. And you have you ever read or seen the movie Friday Night Lights, or the TV show?
No, I have not.
It talks about, I think it's the running back, I've forgotten his name now, but doing his knee early on.
Hmm.
And I played with a junior cricketer who just was one of the most spectacular athletes and thinkers on cricket I ever saw. And he broke his leg when he was about 15, 16, and he just lost his athleticism, and he just didn't develop the way that everyone thought he was going to. I think he was playing grade cricket or district cricket, as we call it, at 16 in Melbourne. And it just never happened for him. At 19, he wasn't playing cricket anymore, right? Like, these people happen all the time. And, occasionally you get a situation where someone like Dirk Nannis appears, right? Where it's like, he gets to 29 and someone goes, "Oh, come on, Dirk, take this seriously." And he does. And things go, that's rare, right? Those kinds of things, things need to happen in your life. And to go back to, the story about Jaiswal, like, you've got a million things could go wrong, and a million things could go right for you, and who knows what happens and where he ends up on a slightly different path. I think a person like him is destined to be successful. But by successful, I mean he could have ended up being a family man with a decent job, living in a lovely flat in Mumbai or Bangalore or Dubai or wherever he ended up, right? I think a person like him has that ability. But the magic is that he went through all of that. And then, I mean, he has the path in front of him.
Yeah.
To be one of the greatest batters of all time. I'm not saying he's going to be. I don't want to put that pressure on him or anything else. But very few players enter Test cricket with his record.
Yeah.
He clearly has a very, very good game. Could get slightly better against pace bowling. That might be the thing that slows him down. He might get sucked in by IPL cricket. He might get sucked in by fame. He might lose the laser focus that he once had. He might get a partner, and him and his partner, you'd think other things are important in life. But he has the ability to get there, and to come from where he's come from to that position on its own, as you said, like it's not even, that's like an 8-part Netflix special. It's not even a movie, right? Like
maybe a multi-season Netflix special.
Exactly. It's like 4 Bollywood movies.
Yeah. You mentioned pressure over there in between, and I think that's another thing that we don't take into account when it comes to Indian cricketers in particular. Look at Shubman Gill, another generational talent. You'd think he's destined for greatness and all that. But here's a guy who has one of those stereotypical brown dads, right? Gill scores 100 and dad says, "Oh, that's not good enough. Should have been a double," right? So Jaiswal has the weight of all of those expectations on his shoulders, and yet we don't see that coming into his game at all. It seems like he's good at blocking these things out and actually focusing on his cricket and just trying to be the best version or best batter that he can possibly be. And it is like, I have not seen many 22-year-olds who speak with that level of conviction and who really believe that, okay, this is my plan, this is what I'm going to do. There's no fluff with Yashasvi Jaiswal. It's all very like strictly cricket.
Yeah, it's very, and there's an element of kind of Steve Smith about that, and eventually that kind of got to Steve Smith.
Yeah.
Right. So that laser focus you have at 20, 21, 22, you see these young professionals come through and they do everything right. And then one thing breaks and they fall apart. Right. We see it in cricket, they're destined for greatness, and then they make it earlier than anyone else does, and then something goes wrong and they don't know how to deal with failure. Does he know how to deal with actual failure? He knows how to deal with an average IPL year, but also knowing he was going to bat in the IPL the next year. Does he know how to play 15 test matches where he doesn't make 100? Right?
True.
Does he know how to deal with losing a game against Pakistan in a World Cup? Right? Does he know what it's like to drop a catch and lose a game? Right? All those sorts of things. They can build up on you. But right at the moment, he's like this perfect overachieving dream boy, right? Like, I mean, that's just what he is. And it's a fascinating, we've had some great stories in cricket. Like, this is right up there with one of the more fascinating ones that we've ever seen of, as you said, manifesting, but, just, it's it's so hard to be that certain.
Yeah.
And he's achieved a level of certainty by the age of 22 that, I mean, few people probably will ever find.
Yeah. And I mean, the rigors in this story, that's what makes it special, right? The fact that at 17, he had experienced so much. He had lived 2 lifetimes by then, right? And yet he is someone who's only played 6 test matches and is averaging over 100 runs per test, which is amazing. That means that if he keeps continuing like that, he'll score 10K in 100 test matches. And, I don't know if he'll ever get to be or become the best batter to have ever played the sport, but let's just talk about the best left-handed batter to have ever played of India, for India. I spoke about this in the other podcast, but that record belongs to Saurav Ganguly, who has like 7,200 runs in test cricket. I mean, you'd probably bet on Yashasvi to beat that tally, even though it's early days and you never know with careers. Injury could happen. Like you said, he could lose his focus. He could, marry someone who's like, oh, screw this, let's play golf. I don't know, something like that.
I remember there's a friend of mine called Manny who used to work on Test Match Sofa, and he tells a story of watching Alistair Cook bat. And I think it was Alistair Cook's first test, and he went and got odds afterwards on Alistair Cook breaking the most hundreds ever made by an England batter. You would put that same bet on Jaiswal right now, right?
Yeah.
To break Ganguly's record. The only reason I wouldn't make that bet is I'm not sure there will be enough Test cricket being played in the next 10 years. I can guarantee. I almost feel like I'm more confident in him scoring more than 7,000 runs than I am in Test cricket being around for him to score more than 7,000 Test runs. And I said that before. There are issues with his game. It's not completely perfect at the moment, and he is young, and he's got all those things can happen. But he just looks. Joe Root. I saw Joe Root playing Nagpur that first test. And I went on a podcast with Mark Butcher and George Tobel, and we were all talking. And I said, well, Joe Root's going to play for England for the next 10 or 12 years. And they looked at me aghast because that's quite a big call.
Yeah.
Right? And I was just like, guys, what are you watching? Like, it's just obvious. Like, there's nothing here I can't see any reason why that wouldn't. And I didn't feel that way about Steve Smith.
I don't think anyone felt that way about Steve.
Actually, that's a good point. I didn't feel that way about Kane Williamson. Kohli was maybe another one. But even then, I don't know if I would have been as clear with Kohli. I would have said that Kohli will eventually be a great player. I'm not sure I would have just, gone out there in that way. You watch this kid, who's 22-year-old, and you kind of see a similar kind of thing. But the other side of it is, he's lived such a fascinating journey. I almost want to see what just happens to him in life. Yeah. Where does he go from here? Because he obviously is a very different kind of person. I don't think you can do what he has done in his life and be just a regular kind of person. So it's a fascinating journey from here. Whether he becomes one of the greatest batters of all time, whether he becomes a bust, whether he becomes a T20 player, whether he becomes obsessed with something else, whether he goes and does what Adrian Barras did and goes off and becomes a preacher, right? Whatever happens from here is going to be fascinating because he's clearly just cut from a different cloth from most human beings.
Maybe he goes and buys the casino that Funky Miller runs. I mean, there's so many things that could happen over here. But yeah, I mean, we spoke about all these origin stories, and of course, Yashasvi stands out, and that's why we kind of saved it for last. But the best part is that we are yet to see how this story unfolds. And I mean, on that note, I suppose, and everyone should go and check up the odds, by the way, of what are the odds?
More runs than Saurav?
Yeah, more runs than Saurav. That's definitely worth looking into because if he's played 6 already, and if he's averaging more than 100 runs per test, that means he will need to play maybe 80. I'm cutting some tests over here. I'm factoring in the dip. Okay, basically.
Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah. So go check those odds. And I mean, if you like this podcast or episode of Footmarks, like it on YouTube or all those platforms that you may be listening in on, and share it with your friends. Subscribe to both this channel and Jared's other channel. And let us know if we missed an interesting origin story, and we'll cover it next time.
Well, I mean, we only went through this one test team. If you go through all of Indian cricket, my God. And it's really important to know, I've done similar things with Australian cricket and Sri Lankan cricket. We don't always factor in that these people are as remarkable as they are.
And if you are a Hollywood producer who is by any chance
We're also
watching this
available.
podcast, we are very much available to take on this project for you. And we can almost guarantee you one Oscar in whatever category, right? There's definitely a story over here that needs to be told. And on that note, let's call it a day. And that's it for Footmarks this week. We'll be back with you next week. And have a good one, guys. Goodbye.